We are live.
Okay, this is the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board meeting. It is Wednesday, July 30th, 2025 at 3 p.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blyle.
Present.
Brown.
Present.
Fasella.
Present.
Friedman.
Present.
Nudo.
Yes.
Ula.
Present.
Arns.
Here.
Quorum present.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as distributed?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next on the agenda is audience participation. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the board on any topic? Hearing none, we'll be moving on to the next agenda item. Is there a motion to approve the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board meeting minutes from June 25th, 2025, open session?
Seconded.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll be moving on to communications. Are there any communications from the board? Hearing.
I just would like to welcome Marks to the board. So I don't want to steal any thunder, but I've had the opportunity to work with him, and as the newbie on the board, I'm not so new anymore. So welcome.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura. Glad you brought that up at this point. Next on our agenda will be the fleet propulsion presentation.
Just for the record, you did steal my thunder, Laura, but that's okay. We can still get to it. So I'm going to invite a couple of other people up here. This is going to be a group presentation. You know Ashley and Josh, but we've got a third guest at the table, Allison Smith, who works with CTE, or the Center for Transportation and the Environment. And Allison is a longtime partner of ours now with primarily with the hydrogen fuel cell project when we first designed that and launched it. But we've also, Allison has helped Ashley with some grant applications, and she works with Ashley on our transition plan, which ironically we'll get to a little later in today's meeting. But so she's real well versed in what we do and why we do it, and so we're going to be a little bit of a I don't know, bobbing for apples or something. We're going to be popping up to the surface, and different ones of us will be speaking at different times. And so just a little history of what we're doing. I mean, Laura and Mark are really new trustees, but honestly, most of the trustees now are new since we started with the hydrogen fuel cell bus project. But all of you are new since we started transitioning to diesel-electric hybrids. And so we were getting some questions from board members, but, remind me why we're doing this, or what does this mean? And so we just thought, now would be a good time to do this kind of general overarching presentation on our propulsion technologies and the reasons behind that, but also to give you a little bit of history. So with that as an intro, let me say, feel free to interrupt anytime. If you have a question or a comment, you can either hold it to the end, but feel totally free to interrupt any one of us too, so you don't forget your question, because I would forget my question. So Josh, I think you're up next.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is just a quick timeline looking from 2008 through 2023. These are just some of the basic highlights of some of our projects and our commitment to sustainability, things that we've been able to accomplish. This list is very condensed, and these are just some of the highlights. I can assure you, if we put everything on here, it would be several pages long and it would overtake the entire slide deck. So this is just going through some highlights. Starting in 2008, the board votes to stop purchasing standard diesel vehicles, and the first diesel electric hybrid buses were ordered. So those were the 2009 buses, and they were, at the time, hybrids were new, and there was only one option. So Allison hybrid drive systems was all we had available to ourselves. So that's what we started off with. 2010, we did several modifications to the building at 1101, which is what we'd call the administration facility, white roof, light tubes, permeable pavers, geothermal HVAC, just to name a few. And then also in 2010, we were granted an EPA award for diesel particulate filters, more commonly known as DPFs. And so what we did there is we took the traditional diesel buses, we did this on the 2001s, which we had 12 of, and then also on our 03 models, which we had 33 of, and we took off the regular exhaust muffler system and added these DPFs. And basically, the DPF is essentially a cleaning mechanism, takes all the soot and dirt that comes out of that diesel engine, and it cleans it up for the air. So we took that grant money and retrofitted 45 buses with that. In 2011, we established our environmental and sustainability management system and also adopted our first environmental policy. 2013 started our journey into the solar arrays. We put a solar array on the rooftop of the 803 maintenance facility. That solar array contains 1,212 solar panels, and those solar panels are what power the 803 maintenance facility. So it offsets about 20% of our current consumption. And then also in 2013, we were certified for the ISO 14001, which is Environmental and Sustainability Management. 2017, we were granted the awarded the money from FTA for the hydrogen fuel cell buses. So that was when we purchased the first two fuel cell buses, most commonly known as the Fox bus and the Butterfly bus. And to my knowledge, and don't fact check me on this, but those I believe are still the only two 60-foot fuel cell buses in the country in operation. New Flyer has started production of new fuel cell 60-foot buses, but I don't think any of them are in service yet that I'm aware of. So we I believe still have the only two. Moving on, fast forwarding to 2021, several improvements were made to the maintenance facility to accommodate these hydrogen fuel cell buses. There were several paths that could have been taken here, but we took the approach of we wanted these buses to be treated just like every other bus, so they should be able to enter storage anywhere that a diesel electric bus can and enter the maintenance shop in any bay that a diesel electric bus can. We didn't want to segment the shop or anything like that. So the building was outfitted with gas detection sensors. Some of the electrical conduits had to be moved. There were several modifications in that process, but that was all done in 2021. That was also when the electrolyzer was constructed and the whole fuel production station, which we'll get into a little bit later. And at that time also the solar array, which is directly across the street, right across University Avenue, just north of the hydrogen station. We had the 2 megawatt array constructed, and that's on, if you know where the UCSD property is, the Champaign Sanitary District, that's where our solar array is. And that, I believe there's a later slide that gets into more of the sizing and some of the specs on that array. And then we get to 2023, we retired the last 4 standard diesel buses, and I got to give a lot of credit to our maintenance team that we've had through the years, because those 4 standard diesel buses that we retired in 2023 were 2001 model year buses. And so, you know, that's 21 years of beating the streets of Champaign-Urbana, potholes and curbs and all that. So not just any maintenance department could have kept those buses in service for that long, but we have a very, very good maintenance department. So a big shout out to them for keeping those buses in service as long as they did. And then at that same time, we received 10 more of the hydrogen buses, which are the 40-foot standard buses that you see now. And at that time, we did, we finally made it to the 100% low or no emission fleet. So at that point, when we got rid of the last 4 diesels, everything in the fleet was either hydrogen fuel cell, which is considered zero emission, or was the diesel electric hybrid bus, which is considered low emission. And think you can go to the next slide. And so this just kind of shows this graph. It goes back to 2009 up until 24, and you can see the progression of the fleet and kind of how we've transitioned. So the orange lines up there at the top starting in 09, those were the hybrid buses. So those were the first 4 we brought in that I mentioned. The gray bar graph at the bottom, those were diesel buses. So as time goes on, you can see the gray bar graph never gets any bigger, it just gets smaller, and the orange gets larger, and that's the hybrid purchases coming in and the diesels going down. And you can kind of see that transition through the years until you get up to 2021, which is when the blue bar graph comes into play. That's the 2 hydrogen coaches that came into the fleet. You see a small jump up in 2022. We expanded the fleet, and you'll actually see that throughout this bar graph when the top line goes up. Those were expansions of the fleet throughout the years. And then 23 and 24, you can see more blue there as well, where we added the hydrogen coaches, the next 10. And the dotted line that's going across that bar graph indicates our fuel consumption. So that's looking at the number of buses that we have throughout the years and how many gallons of diesel fuel per bus was being utilized. And so kind of what you notice is that line, it does jump up a little, but then it trails down all the way until you get to 2024. And that was when or 2023, it starts to turn up, and 24 continues on. And that was mostly as we return back to a full level of service. There's more buses on the street. They're going to consume more fuel. And one thing kind of particularly to note, we did do a comparison with our neighboring transit agency in Bloomington. They have some New Flyer standard conventional diesel buses. And so I got some data from them, compared it against our hybrid buses, just to kind of get an idea of the fuel savings when you're looking at a conventional diesel versus a hybrid. Using their buses, which operate in a pretty similar environment, of course, to ours, we noticed there's about a 20% increase in fuel economy on the hybrids, which, based on our fueling purchases, approximately $300,000 a year annual savings on fuel. And
Quick question.
You can probably go to the next slide. You have a question?
Yeah, on the fleet transition history, if you please go back to that. So the dotted line, as you mentioned, since 2022 up to 2024, there is an increase. Is it because of there will be like more buses operating?
Yeah, we began operating more. That was post-COVID, so as we came out of that, we started entering back into a full level of service. So we were putting more buses out onto the street. And also, too, you can see in 2022, and I believe in 2020 also, you'll notice the orange line got a little bit bigger because we did add a couple of hybrid buses in as we were expanding the fleet. So there's more buses, and then the larger level of service is why you see that increase start to happen. Okay,
so it's the unit is gallons per bus, so it's probably like because of the more level of service, so like they are running for a longer time.
Yes, correct. And just kind of as a footnote too, if you're curious, just for numbers' sake, if you take our entire diesel electric fleet and you look at the fuel economy, it blends with 40-footers and 60-footers to about 5.38 miles per gallon. The 40-footers are about 6.28, and the 60-footers are about just a little over 4, about 4.1. So that's just to kind of give you some context of miles per gallon. That's about what the buses operate at. Welcome. I think you can go to the next slide. And so as we entered into the hybrid space, as I mentioned earlier, Allison was the only option that was available back in 2009. We purchased Allison buses in 2009, 2011, and also in 2013. And Allison served us well as kind of a starting point for hybrids. We did have some issues in the early adoption of some high maintenance costs, high repair costs, functionality issues, levels of support were hit and miss. As time went on, the Allison product did improve, and it is a good product still to this day that's on the market. But in 2016, we made a switch over to BAE, which is just a competitor of Allison's. And so if you're buying a hybrid on the market right now, your only two options are Allison or BAE. The BAE system has undergone several changes through the years. They've had a Generation 1, Generation 2. They're now on a Generation 3. And so we've kind of followed that trend line with BAE starting in 2016, and all of our purchases since then that have been hybrids have all been BAE for numerous reasons. Level of support has been great. The buses' repair costs have been lower than Allison's. They're a little more modular in terms of like failure points on the buses, or a little easier to identify. You don't have as many large components that control larger parts of the bus that are expensive to replace. You can replace components, which are less expensive and easier to obtain. So we've had, I would say, really, really good success with BAE. BAE also has a data logger system where they log and watch the bus as it's in operation. So if we have any failures, if there's any impending performance issues, BAE logs that, and their engineers will actually reach out to us in some cases and let us know that they're seeing some decline in a bus. So it's a really great level of service that is truly unmatched. And then the final point I'll make about that too is that BAE is the only hybrid manufacturer that uses ultracapacitors. And so in 2018, we started procuring 40-foot buses that have ultracapacitors in place of the batteries. And so the ultra caps have the ability to charge and discharge a lot more quickly than batteries do. And generally speaking, they'll last the life of the bus. Usually buses with battery packs will require at some point either a midlife, or you can try to run them to the end of their service life without replacing it, but in most cases, battery packs have to be replaced. So the ultracapacitors are less maintenance. They also have less degradation than the batteries do. And so much more recyclable, a lot more environmentally friendly. And so that's another reason why we've kind of stuck with BAE. They're a little further ahead of the curve on that. Allison currently is not offering any ultracapacitors, only BAE. I think we can move forward.
Yeah, that's me. Real quick comment about the ultracaps before I move on to this part of the presentation. The other advantage is it's a completely different supply chain than what the battery supply chain is. And so as we, as a people all over the globe, are moving toward battery everything, we are consuming a lot of the non-renewable resources to produce batteries. And so with the ultracaps, we get actually, in some respects, a little better functionality, but we get that without using batteries or the battery supply chain. And so that's just a bonus. And then, Josh, I can't believe you didn't mention, they're actually less expensive than batteries too. So that's a bonus. All right, so moving back onto the presentation. The transit as a whole, about 10 years ago, just shortly after we started moving to hybrid technology, battery electric vehicles really started to get a toehold all around the globe again. And there's a big mouthpiece for battery electric vehicles with Tesla and the owner of Tesla. And so when people think about electric vehicles, they think about battery electric vehicles. But we started seeing battery electric buses being implemented all across the country, and almost immediately we started seeing deployment problems. The range was not sufficient with battery electric buses. The batteries are very expensive to replace, and as Josh just mentioned with hybrids, frequently hybrid battery packs will need to be replaced. Always battery electric buses, the battery packs will have to be replaced midlife. And so at $250,000, $300,000 a pop, that starts adding up. And so with the operational problems and the costs and supply chain issues with battery electric buses, we decided to take a wait and see attitude, and we weren't really liking what we were seeing. There were just too many problems associated with it. I always had a dream, a fantasy, I don't know what you want to call it, of fuel cell vehicles, and there were some fuel cell vehicles here and there, but they weren't they weren't readily available for many years, for about 10 years, while battery electric vehicles were. And I was at a conference, and one of Allison's coworkers came up to me and said, Carl, New Flyer, your bus manufacturer, wants to have a meeting with you, and I'm going to be there. I was like, Okay. So we were at a reception and we got our glasses of wine and kind of moved over into a corner and started hobnobbing with one another. And they said, we want to build these 60-foot hybrid hydrogen fuel cell electric buses, and we want to partner with you in a low-no application. So we did that. And that's what launched the whole program with CTE as a partner and New Flyer as a partner. And so why did we arrive at that point? Well, these 3 goals led us there. If we were going to go zero emission, we wanted to accomplish these 3 goals. One is to truly be zero emission. We wanted to be intellectually honest when we said we're at zero emission. And so, as Josh alluded to, we produce our own hydrogen on site with an electrolyzer that is powered by a solar array. So we're zero emission with the production of the fuel, all the way through the use of the fuel in the vehicle, zero emission. And so, no shade, but Indianapolis, Indiana, they run their battery electric vehicles and they say they're zero emission. They're really not, because they plug them in and they charge them overnight and they're on the grid, and the majority of the grid still is produced by burning fossil fuel. And not only that, all those battery electric buses have diesel auxiliary heaters on them. Dirty little secret of the battery electric bus industry. They still have diesel heaters on them. So they still have a diesel tank on them. They're still burning diesel fuel on the vehicle. So they're not really zero emission. And we wanted to be more intellectually honest with that. And I should say, there's value in what they're doing. They're much lower emission than any diesel or CNG bus, but I'm just making a point that they're not truly zero emission. Along with that, very closely associated with that, we wanted to actually reduce our use of fossil fuels. And so if we're plugging into the grid in central Illinois, much of that is still using fossil fuels to produce the grid. Here in Champaign-Urbana, we don't get much electricity from the Clinton power plant, the nuclear. We get some, but it's a single-digit percentage that comes from that. Some comes from solar, and that's good, but still a lot of it is from burning coal and natural gas. And so we wanted to get away from that. Most important was this goal number 3, the minimal operational impact. We saw transit agencies not only struggling with the efficacy of their battery electric vehicles, but this whole new cottage industry bloomed with tools and products so that transit agencies could redo the product that they put out on the street, their routes and schedules. They could redo it to accommodate their vehicles' needs, the battery electric vehicles' needs. And we said, we want our service to reflect our customers' needs, not our vehicles' needs. And so, as Josh also said, we wanted a bus to be a bus. And we can pull any bus out of our garage and accomplish any aspect of our service so that people can reliably be picked up where and when they need and want to be. And so the fuel cell vehicles really accomplish all 3 of those goals. And so we excitedly applied for the Lono application with CTE and New Flyer, and that was the seed money that we used for launching this project. So I will be the first to tell you that fuel cell buses are very expensive, and the infrastructure was very expensive, so we can move to the next slide. Lots of people say, well, you need to get battery electric buses, because if you buy a new battery electric bus and a brand new fuel cell bus, the battery electric bus is about $100,000 cheaper. So why wouldn't you do that? Well, because you have to replace the batteries midlife on it, and there's another $250,000 or $300,000. And you have to buy a charger. Oops, didn't include that in the cost of the bus, but still need a charger to do that. That's another $250,000. And you need one for every single battery electric bus that you buy, because you got to charge them all at the same time. And so as this chart shows, over time, the x-axis on the bottom, as your fleet size grows, when you buy fuel cell buses, you have to do that station up front, and that's expensive. But then you buy buses after that, and there's no additional infrastructure cost with it, and there's no battery replacement with it. And so the per vehicle cost over the project lifetime goes down, whereas with battery electric, it continues to go up because you have to buy this new infrastructure every time you buy a bus. And the chargers also wear out and have limited life, so you have to replace those, and on it goes. And so this is just, this is not, don't take this to the bank. There are no numbers on here because it's a concept of what we're seeing in the industry. We see the per unit cost go down with fuel cell, and we see the unit cost go up with battery electric, but it varies greatly from property to property and different regions of the country and all of that. And so this is just to kind of give you an idea of the loose costs of both types of
Earl,
fuel. Yes, yes.
you're talking, I may be getting ahead of you. You talked about eventually having some battery electric buses. Are you thinking in terms of waiting until they have ultra-cap electric storage instead of battery storage?
You are correct. We do have in our transition plan, and I can't recall right off the top of my head if this comes up later in this presentation, but it is in the transition plan, which we'll get to a little later in the agenda. In 2035 or something, we have it projected that we'll start introducing battery electric vehicles into the fleet. That can change at any time. We bring the transition plan to you every year, and so we make changes and adjustments on an ongoing basis. So that may change, but we're kind of projecting that over the next 10 or so years, the battery electric technology will improve to the point where we have a higher comfort level of bringing them on into the fleet. It's not so much that they would be ultra caps. I don't think ultra caps would ever be able to be a wholesale replacement for batteries in a battery electric vehicle. They don't provide enough oomph to be able to work as a sole energy source in a vehicle. The reason they work with the hybrids is because we still have the diesel engine in the hybrid, and so they're paired with the diesel engine. So I don't think we'll ever see an ultra cap only vehicle, at least probably not in our lifetime. But the hope with the battery electric technology is that they'll introduce solid state batteries, and that is a different supply chain than the current batteries, and they'll be more stable and have a longer lifespan and be recyclable. So that when that becomes readily available, when they become readily available, that gives us an opportunity to consider that. Still have a question about plugging into the grid or having some other form of energy to charge the batteries, but in 10 years, maybe the grid will be predominantly sustainably powered also. So it's just to give us time to continue to evaluate, and maybe we'll introduce them.
I guess I would throw out, we're going to be comfortable introducing battery electric vehicles when, like you said, they don't interrupt the flow of our operations. Right now, campus is a huge part of what we do, and our kids like to stay out late at the bars. They like to stay out late studying at the library, and they get up early and go exercise at IMPI. And what are you guys running buses for 20 hours a day? So we got 4 hours to charge buses, and then they got to run for 20 hours. I mean, at this point, the technology isn't there to run the full double shift with a battery electric bus. So we're either going to have a ton more buses and be juggling them, and then what do we do when, it doesn't quite need a battery replacement, but it only runs 6 hours? I think it'd be a nightmare for you guys. So let's hope, hey, they come up with a battery that charges really fast and holds a charge for a long time, and when that happens, if it happens, we'll do it.
That's exactly right, Phil. Thanks. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Allison. Allison, can you give a little, just a mini bio before you launch into the presentation?
Sure. Okay. So, yeah, thanks, Carl. And I just want to say it's been really a pleasure and an honor to work with MTD on this project. I got involved 7 years ago when we kicked off the station and 60-foot bus build, providing project management and technical support to the district. And then CTE as an organization, I think we have about 100 active projects, primarily with transit, working on zero-emission transition projects. And my role is to oversee all the hydrogen technical work that we do. So I have visibility into most of the hydrogen deployments across the country, and I'm happy to field any questions about the technology, the infrastructure, where the industry is, where Champaign's project sits within the rest of the US's hydrogen transit space. Yeah, I can talk fuel cell buses all day. So with that, I can start with the next part of the presentation. So Carl already talked about this, that this project really is zero emission. The hydrogen is produced on site with solar power. The amount of energy produced by the solar arrays is greater than what gets used by the station. So we're really not having to draw on grid power at all. We're not having to have any emissions from trucking hydrogen in from anywhere else. It's being made right on site and being fueled directly into buses, and zero tailpipe. Often when we hear that term zero emission, people refer to zero tailpipe, but this is really zero we call well to wheel, from production to consumption at the vehicle. And FTA has recognized how impressive this project is. They gave an award in 2022 through a climate challenge to recognize MTD for the innovative solution for deploying zero-emission technology. Let's get there. And then, Josh, did you want to talk about the specifics?
Sure. So as it says at the top of the slide, powered by solar, and it is, and more so. So this array at the UCSD that you're looking at, it's actually broken up into two separate arrays. So there's the ground-mounted array, which you see down on top of the grass in the ground. But then further in the background behind the trees, there's a rooftop array up there as well. It is rated for 2 megawatts. And annual production's around 3 million kilowatt hours. We commonly, because this is directly connected into the H2 station, and so when the H2 station is drawing power or has power needs and the sun is shining and we're harvesting solar, it's going directly, it's a direct feed into the station. Now, as Allison had mentioned earlier, it is oversized for the station demands, and so all of that overage that we harvest from the solar arrays then goes back into the grid. So we're putting energy credits back onto the grid. So it is fair to say at night when the sun's not out, we do use grid power, but we overproduce so much solar, it by far offsets any of our usage off of the grid. As a matter of fact, I get a report from Ameren every month of how much additional solar power we put back onto the grid. And for last month, it was 299,000 kilowatt hours. So it's a pretty substantial amount that we put back. But in total, between the ground array and the rooftop array, we have 5,500 panels, and it's approximately 8 acres of land that we have a long-term lease with UCSD for. And again, it is a direct connection to the hydrogen station, as I had mentioned. And so the on-site production, so this is just a picture of the production station and the two 60-foot buses that were brought in 2021 parked out in front. So it is a 1 megawatt Nell branded electrolyzer that produces our hydrogen, and it's capable of 420 kilograms a day, but it's broken up, there's 4 cell stacks, so we can kind of throttle that up or throttle that down just based on our needs. But with the 4 cell stacks, you can basically break that into like chunks of 25%. So we don't have to run it at full power if we don't need it. That can be scaled down. And we do utilize an O&M agreement with the company that built the station, so they work to try to strategize and help run the station as efficiently as possible to ensure that we have all the fuel we need, but we're not overusing power or overusing water to try to do so. We have about 934 kilograms of hydrogen gas storage. And those are, if you're looking at the picture all the way to the far right, that's all those vessels that you see there. There's 27 storage vessels in total. And this is all sitting on a 50-foot by 250-foot footprint with really nice not cinder block, but block wall along the backside and the sides, and then we have a nice steel fence out front. So if you're just driving by, you wouldn't even really know that the station's there. It's nice, clean curb appeal, and everything is behind the fence. 7 to 10 minute refueling window sure beats 4 to 6 to 8 hours of an electric bus, and that is true. There are times if a bus is really, really low on fuel, there are times it could go past that window, but there's times that it's less than that. So that 7 to 10 minutes is pretty realistic, and we've really got a pretty good dialed-in process now. So when these buses come off the street at midnight or 1 a.m. or whenever it is, we can pull them in and we fuel them right in the same fuel line as our diesel-electric hybrid buses. So they're not treated differently, they're not placed differently, they go right in the same fuel line. You just grab a different dispenser to fuel a bus. And we do have monitoring over this station as well, just for safety. And we have a HMI screen that basically shows us production values, gives us a lot of like real-time statistics on how the station is performing and our fuel levels and everything like that.
Okay, thanks. So one of the things CTE helps with is we help with reporting on key performance indicators for the station and the buses to evaluate how the program's doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fleet performance, where we are with the cost of hydrogen, and then how is the program stacking up against those goals that Carl brought up initially. So next slide. On the fleet performance, so this is an overview of the 60-foot bus. I'm not going to go through all of the specs here unless you want me to, but there are 2 60-foot coaches in the fleet, as Josh said. I do think these are the only ones in revenue service right now. There are in the country, there are some in production, which will hopefully go into service later this year or early next year, but they've been in service since 2021. Carrying passengers around the community. And over the last 10 months, August of last year through May of this year, we reported a fuel economy of 3.5 miles per kilogram. So that's real in-service operation, not an optimistic number from a spec sheet. And based on that and the capacity of the buses, we're looking at a 200-mile range for those vehicles in real-world service, which is sufficient to meet all of MTD's blocks, which is that really key aspect that we were talking about in terms of not having to change your service to meet the needs, or your operations to meet the needs of the vehicles. These vehicles can be put into any 60-foot block in MTD service without a second thought. And so the next slide, this shows the 40-foot buses. So there are 10 of these. These went into service early last year. And we did the same fuel economy estimate, getting around 10 miles per kilogram, which is about the highest I've seen in a fleet so far, which is really great to see that kind of fuel economy, and that translating with these vehicles to a 320-mile range, so well above the needs of any individual block in MTD service territory. And I think one of the other things that's not listed here but is important to note is that we did do some validation testing on these vehicles and drove them around on the highway. And sometimes the challenge with a fuel cell bus can be power requirements, but we were able to drive it around for an hour plus with no power issues. So that was really great to see that these vehicles can run for extended ranges on the highway. So that's what I've got on that with the buses. So there's a lot question?
I was just going to throw at Josh a question. Obviously, is a pretty massive disparity in the fuel economy for the 60 versus the 40. How much of that would you say is a product of the efficiency of the system, and how much is just our 60-footers are sort of on a hell route where they're on campus, start, stop, idle kind of situation?
Yeah, I think you answered some of your own question there, but the passenger loads and just the amount of people on it, I think certainly drags it down pretty substantially as well. So.
It's also that fuel cell in the 60-foot bus is a less powerful fuel cell than the 40-foot, but the 60-foot bus obviously is significantly heavier than the 40-foot. So it's kind of got everything working against it, if you're comparing the two, but still does well.
Yeah, and that, Carl brought up a good point that I didn't, was that first generation fuel cell bus that we got, the 260-footers, that was the FC Velocity. That was Ballard's first transit attempt at a fuel cell. The 2023s, the 1040-footers that we have, that has the new redesign FC Move, which is much smaller, less maintenance, more reliable, much more efficient. And so I think that also kind of plays into some of the disparity that you see there.
Would it ever be feasible to upgrade that? I mean, something to...
We wouldn't upgrade those, but the next 60-foot fuel cell bus we get will have that FC Move. That Velocity is no longer in production.
Any other questions? All right. There's kind of a lot. Oh, yes.
I've just been thinking of what you might call a nightmare scenario. What if we have big hail and it breaks the solar panels? What do we do then?
The solar panels that we have on the roof of 803, we've had those in service since, what did we say, 2013? So 12 good years, and we've had some pretty significant hailstorms. A couple years ago, I had to have the roof of my house replaced because of a hailstorm, but those solar panels weathered that hailstorm. They are constructed to be outside just like they are. That is how they're made, and they weather very well. It's not that they can't ever break. We have replaced solar panels on our rooftop array before, but not en masse, not the totality of them because of hail or wind or whatever. They're very hardy.
And two, with that, just a couple quick things. The station is still tied into utility power. So if for some reason the inverters were down or catastrophic hail, we still can operate. We just wouldn't be able to utilize the solar. But we also, too, have an O&M agreement with a solar contractor that oversees that solar array plus the one on the 803 maintenance facility. So they walk through it monthly, do a big check every 6 months, and it's very rare that we're replacing panels due to damage. It's more conduits, fuses, things like that. But the panels tend to be pretty durable. But with that solar contractor, I mean, they have eyes on it all the time. So I feel like they do a really good job making sure we're producing it at a maximum level.
All right. I think I said this, there's a lot going on this slide, but this is about the cost per kilogram of hydrogen. This is a big topic of discussion because we need the cost of hydrogen to come down, generally speaking. But if you look over here, we've got MTD's cost of hydrogen over the last 10 months. So showing the cost being anywhere from $1.83 to $11.50 a kilogram. So these numbers are just based on the electricity cost and the water cost. So there are, even if we have a month where we've got a ton of solar production, there's still an electricity cost for being able to be tied to the grid and things like that. So that will fluctuate. The average is $5.67 a kilogram. What does that mean? I think the easiest way to think about it is that a kilogram of hydrogen has the same energy content of about a gallon of diesel, but a fuel cell bus is generally about twice as efficient as a diesel bus. So to get price parity to $2.50 a gallon of diesel, you need to be at about that $5 a kilogram number. So that's generally a target that we are aiming for, is that $5 a kilogram. So, and we've been under that the last couple of months at MTD with the 12 buses in regular operation and a higher solar output kind of months. And comparing this to the industry, if we're looking at the cost per kilogram dispensed for gaseous hydrogen, which is what Champaign has, we're usually looking at $20 to $35 a kilogram. So a much higher cost to deliver that than what MTD is paying to produce it on site. And then if you're looking at liquid, it's lower, but it's still in that $13 to $20 a kilogram range. So what MTD is paying for the hydrogen production is a very good price for what we're seeing for hydrogen. So just as a reminder, these were some of the goals that Carl highlighted at the beginning. So are we truly zero emission well to wheel? Are we reducing the fossil fuel consumption compared to other technologies? And are we minimizing the operational impact? So we've got a summary slide addressing these points a little more specifically. But from the zero emissions point, we are zero emissions from well to wheel, right? The solar facility is producing more energy than the station is using. Fossil fuel consumption is being reduced. The hybrid buses are more efficient than the buses at Bloomington Normal. And then the hydrogen buses don't require any diesel. There's no natural gas input to make the hydrogen. It's all from water and electricity. So that goal is being achieved. And then on the operational side, we've talked about this a couple times, but the buses can be assigned to any route in the service territory. We don't have to specially assign blocks because of range concerns or anything like that. The fueling time is comparable. The buses generally take 7 to 10 minutes to fuel, so a little bit longer than the diesels, but something that's certainly still workable operationally. It's very similar to CNG fueling times as well, and much faster than a depot-charged battery electric bus, which might take hours to charge. Operator training, the range is very similar. You've got regenerative braking just like you do on your hybrids. So yes, it's a new technology, but it's not really all that different to drive this kind of vehicle. And then because you don't have chargers, you don't have to park the buses in a specific spot. You can park them anywhere in the storage bays. You can use them in any maintenance bay. So there's no extra logistical coordination with these buses. So many aspects of that goal are achieved as well.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about our future plans, and these slides will overlap with what we're going to talk about later with our zero emission transition plan. If you could go to the next slide. So first, we have this future fleet composition chart, and this builds off the chart that Josh showed previously, but just starting from now going into the future. So we start in the current year of 2025, the orange reflects diesel hybrid, blue, the fuel cell buses, and green, electric buses. So currently, of course, we have 12 hydrogen fuel cell buses and 106 diesel electric hybrids. You'll see in 2027, there's a little note on top of the bar that shows hydrogen station expansion, and that allows us to grow our hydrogen fuel cell fleet gradually up to about 72 buses we're projecting by 2033. And then as we talked about earlier, we're projecting possibly introducing battery electric buses around 2034. We kind of already talked about why. Ultimately, since both of these technologies are new, we're not quite ready to put all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak. So we would like to have both technologies on site if they meet all of our needs, but putting that off a little bit so that the technology can optimize. We didn't talk about this, but we're also putting it off because we don't want to overburden our maintenance department. So ideally, keeping just 2 technologies on site for them to maintain as long as possible. It also helps us with spare parts on hand if we only have 2 technologies to maintain at a time. Yes?
Is there a plan on where the H2 expansion would take place?
Yes, I will get to that in just 2 more slides. Yeah, thank you. I think we can move on from this slide. And then this is also from the Zero Emission Transition Plan. This shows, it just illustrates the hydrogen infrastructure costs. So illustrating that economies of scale chart that Carl showed earlier, we have some pretty significant upfront investments for the hydrogen fuel cell infrastructure. So in 2021, you see that significant $17.7 million investment that included our production station, but it also included the solar array and also some facility facility modifications. And then again in 2027, that additional expansion, which we're projecting to be about 13 million for liquid hydrogen storage. And then the dark line that goes across the graph just illustrates the number of buses that those infrastructure investments support over time. So again, those two significant investments, but then ultimately supporting about 72 buses we're projecting with both those investments through 2041. And then the final slide, getting to your question about where the expansion would go. So we did build in empty space for expansion in the original station construction. So the yellow outline on this slide shows the current station walls, and then the black on the left shows our current station elements, and then the blue outline currently in the real world is empty. There's nothing in that blue outline. That's our expansion space. And so the elements in the blue outline are just examples of some of the equipment that could fit in that space that would serve as our fueling expansion for liquid hydrogen storage. And that is essentially the future, a basic outline of the future plans. And that's also our last slide in the presentation. So we've talked a little bit about our past, current, and future, and we can take any additional questions if you have any.
I guess, you know, I think it's important to be able to take liquid hydrogen, just gives us diversity of supply, right? And I also think as we expand the fleet, Josh is probably going to be able to nurse out fuel from the current electrolyzer for more than 12 buses on a given day. But I do want to make sure we don't know what's going to happen over the next 10 years. And I don't want to do anything that will foreclose the possibility of producing more hydrogen on site. You know, we don't know how the layout of the neighborhood's going to change. For all we know, Norfolk Southern might pull out in a few years whenever that bridge over 45 needs changed, and Emulsicoat may move. And I sure like being able to say we got solar panels in the neighborhood that are going to power the buses. And I also think that liquid hydrogen is going to work out to be fairly expensive. And, you know, I imagine we're talking about green or blue hydrogen, but, you know, as you get into liquid hydrogen made from natural gas, that can be not great for the environment either. So I think we're going in a good direction, but just, I would say, it'd be really cool if the plans could, depending on how things change, if we have more land available, you know, someday maybe allow us to produce a little more like we're doing.
I guess the only question I had about conversion to electric is I know I drive an electric car, and there's a huge variance in range with atmospheric temperature. And I'm assuming that hydrogen does not have any effect, the temperature doesn't have any effect on the range. But that's really the big question. You know, they can tell you you're going to get 300 miles or 200 miles on a 40 or 60-foot electric bus, but temperature really plays havoc.
Yeah, you're right, and that's all the nature of batteries. They are very susceptible to temperatures, and so, yeah, I think I've said even at a board meeting that, you know, a couple years ago, I think it was Louisville, Kentucky, they have like 20 battery electric buses, and in January they had to park them all because they were getting like 20 miles in their range. I mean, they couldn't use them, and so they couldn't put all their service out on the street because they just had to park those buses. That's a problem, and we really want to not be in that situation if at all possible. So you're right, the fuel cell buses don't have that kind of sensitivity. They do have batteries on them, but the batteries are remaining charged because the fuel cell is the range extender. It's constantly charging the batteries, as opposed to a battery electric you plug in and then it's on its own, and so it starts just dropping in those temperatures. The other thing about the batteries and range, you know, the manufacturer will tell you, no, you can get 120 miles out of this battery electric bus. You know, that's questionable, but let's just, you know, benefit of the doubt and say you do get 120 miles. That's on day one in perfect weather with no passengers on the bus. And on day two, when you have it in real service and you've got a busload of people, which we do, and then it's January and it's 10 degrees outside, then you're not getting 120. But also, day three you get less, day four you get less, because the batteries degrade over time, and you're going to see that with your car too. That 6 years from now, at maximum charge, you'll get less range out of it than you did the day you bought it.
No question. I got an onboard computer which tells me how much the degradation is today from 4 years ago, and there's a big variance in range with over 90-degree days and under 0 days. It's two-way. You gotta have moderate. If you're in San Diego, you might be happy with it, but not here.
Go ahead.
From a driver's standpoint, have they indicated that it's a pretty smooth operation and not really any issues compared to the hybrids with the hydrogens?
Yeah, I can't say that I get a lot of feedback from operators, but I take that as a good sign. When I do hear something from an operator, it's generally positive. They like them. They are smoother. They're quieter. They have more pickup than a heavy diesel slow roll starting bus. So yeah, I think in general they like them. When we first introduced them, there might have been some reticence amongst some employees, but nothing dramatic or problematic. And so I think we're past all of that, and we get good feedback. And this wasn't a part of your question, but just as a side note, and as a bus rider, you probably, I'm presuming, not to speak for you, but you probably feel the same way, that the public loves them. We only hear rave comments from this community about those buses.
Yeah, they are, well, the art on the outside of them is really cool, but they're also a really smooth ride. I can attest to that, so.
The only other thing I was going to mention, kind of going back to Alan's point, many of the transit agencies that I've spoken with that have adopted the battery electric technology, one thing that's kind of required is having a telematics system that will look at driver behavior, because much like in your battery electric car, if Alan has a heavy foot that day, his range might have started at 180 miles, but if he's heavy footing it and he's got the AC cranked and the lights on and all that, that range drops really quickly. And so driver behavior becomes a really big part of battery electric buses. And it's to a point where it has to be managed, or you'll, one, the degradation, but also just the range can be diminished so quickly just from driver to driver. And the fuel cell buses, while not perfect, but it doesn't, the range is totally disregarded. It doesn't matter whoever's driving it, cold weather, hot weather, none of that plays enough of a factor to change any of our decision making or change any of our management or oversight practices.
Okay, thank you all. That was a very informative presentation. Thanks for all the work that you've all put in. Appreciate that. Next in our agenda, the Managing Director's report. Carl?
All right, and I'll echo thanks, Allison, for your participation and coming in town for this. A couple of side notes before I get into the statistics part of the meeting. One is to welcome Mark to the board. We have a full board, so that's great. And Mark brings a perspective as a I think I heard him say almost daily rider, so that's significant. But also your family rides regularly also. So that is always nice when you have that perspective on the board, and so I think we'll really enjoy working with Mark, and so welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And then I have a little bit of news. I should have checked with Ashley before I did this, but I'm just going to roll with it. And if I feel something hitting me on the back of the head, I'll know I shouldn't have. But we have early indications. You've heard me say that, you heard me announce that we had been awarded a raise grant for, that we applied for to help the city of Urbana with redoing Florida Avenue. It's a $10 million raise grant. And then the new administration came in and said, whoa, we're going to put everything on pause and we're going to evaluate whether or not we're really going to do these or not. We have an indication from the Federal Highway Administration that our project is moving forward. And so we think that that's really, really good news. I don't feel anything hitting me on the back of the head, so I think I'm, oh, 2 thumbs up, all right. Yeah, that's great news. We actually have a kickoff meeting planned next week with the City of Urbana and the Federal Highway Administration, so that's super exciting, and so hopefully we'll have more information in the not too distant future about that. And with that, I will just move into the stats. Our June 2025 total ridership reached 369,429. June is one of, if not the lowest ridership month that we have. It's smack dab dead in the summer, and students are gone, and faculty and staff are on vacations, and lots of other people are on vacations too. So it's just a low month, but that still was a 2.5% increase compared to last June. So that's good. And our fiscal year 2025 year-to-date ridership was 11.3 million rides. That is a 19.2% increase over last year. Now, last month I ill-advisedly made a projection that our year-end ridership would be, I think I said it would be 11,450,000. So I was off by 0.5%. And so hopefully you don't whip me with a wet noodle for that inaccurate prediction. What, Alan? A wet noodle or noodle? A wet, ooh, I don't want to go there. Wet noodle, yeah. It's a good one. You should keep that one all to yourself. All right, enough with the comedy act. Moving on, here you see a slide of the last month of the fiscal year, and you can see just how we keep coming back. The pre-pandemic June, while it was a low month for the year, was 414,000, so we're still 11% below that, but overall we're doing quite well. I did want to note that George meant, this is just a fun fact, fun aside that George sort of triggered in my head last meeting, because he mentioned that he remembered when we crossed the 1 million ride threshold. And so I just wanted to mention, the district was formed in 1971, and that was 1975 was the year that we crossed the million ride threshold. But I thought this was really interesting. I went back and I looked for the entire history of the district since 1971 through June of 2025. I'm not going to ask you to guess how many rides we've carried, how many passengers we've carried. I'll just tell you, it's 386,701,672 rides from 1971 through 2025 fiscal years. So that's kind of cool. Gosh, I thought there might be some applause from staff, maybe some. All right. Moving on to operating revenue. This looks really strange. It's looked strange the last several years in June. As a reminder, when we were not under full service, we were giving credits back to the University of Illinois for their contract because we weren't providing full service. And so they continued to pay to make their full payment, and then we calculated the number of hours that we actually provided versus what we were contracted to provide, and we gave them a credit back for what we didn't provide. So you see, it's not labeled FY 2024, but that flat line there, the revenue for June of 2024 was flat. It actually was a negative because we gave that credit back. And so we're done with that. We're in full service. We're not doing the credit anymore. And so you can see we had the revenue of June of 2025 of $755 million. So this looks goofy, that 497% increase. Ignore that. That's goofy and not really representative of what reality is. But next year we'll compare June of 2026 to this June of 2025, and it'll be a normal looking chart. So forgive me for that. Moving on to the year-to-date, that looks a little more normal, and you can see that is an 8.9% increase when you compare June of 2024 to June of 2025. Moving on to operating expenses, the June 2025 operating expenses were 1.3% below June of 2024. A good part of that difference, why our expenses were down, is maintenance is kind of a lumpy expense. I mean, you could have a really good year, you could have a really bad year, or you can have lots of good months and a bad month every now and again. In June of 2024, we happened to have I can't remember if it was an engine replacement or a hybrid drive system. I think it was the hybrid drive system that we had to replace, one that failed. And so, you know, life happens, and sometimes that costs money. And so the expenses were a little overblown in June of 2024. The year-to-date operating expenses were 5.9% above last fiscal year, and that's more normalized when you look at the whole year. The operating revenue, the budget compared to actual, the revenue was $1.9 million above what we budgeted, and the expenses were $4.3 million below what we budgeted. You can clear the slides off the screen if you want, Tech. Just to close out, I have a note in the Managing Director notes about the House Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Bill. They call it the THUD bill, believe it or not. And the House version of that had cuts to pretty significant cuts to transit, had lots of cuts all across transportation and housing and urban development. So that was, we're watching things real closely with that. The good news is on July 24th, the Senate Banking Committee released their version of the THUD bill, and they actually have a 1% increase in funding. So while not dramatic, I'll take a 1% increase over a 13% cut any day. So, you know, they've got to work all those details out in conference, and nothing has been approved yet, but just pointing out that you don't know what you're going to get until you get it, and there's a lot of work and lots of disagreement in Washington, D.C. still, as you know, so we'll keep updating you as we go along. With that, I will take any questions that you might have through page 35 of your board packet.
Questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to action items. Let's discuss Resolution 2025-6, setting a public hearing for an annexation northwest of Curtis and Staley in Champaign. Carl?
Yes, we are moving through the list of annexations that you approved many months ago now. It takes a little while to do this, but the surveyors have to create a legal definition. We have to find a place to do a public hearing and just jump through all the hoops and check all the boxes. And so we're finally ready to get this one set. And so let me turn to that page so I can tell you, you have it in front of you what the date is. Oh, I don't even have that. Help me out, Katie. September 4th. Is that right? Yeah, September 4th for the public hearing for Staley and Curtis. Thank you.
This will be a 1-hour hearing this time?
Yes.
All right, I would move that we set the hearing.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Do we need a roll call on this one? Okay.
Blyle,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Nudo,
Yes?
Barnes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Our next action item, the semi-annual review of closed session minutes.
Yeah, hopefully you've all had a chance to review the minutes. We've only had one closed session since the last time we did this. It was for February 26, 2025, and staff is recommending that we release those minutes. There's no reason to keep them confidential. So you can see the suggested motions in your packet on page 41.
I would move to approve this suggested motion as printed.
Is there a second? There's a second. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blyle,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Aye.
Friedman,
Yes.
Nudo,
Yes?
Barnes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Our next action item is to consider the annual update to the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, otherwise known as PTASP.
This is the first of a couple of things we're going to ask for you to approve that are just updates of things that the board has already approved. So Brendan Sennett is coming up to talk you through some of the changes of the PTASP.
Thanks, Carl. Brendan Sennett, Safety and Training Director. In front of you is the 6th revision of our Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, which was originally approved by the board in, I believe, June of 2020. Since that time, we've made a lot of changes to it, but this is the one year where there's very minimal changes. Really the only update to it is our update of the safety performance measures. We're required to update these each year. It is a rolling 5-year average of our safety performance. And that's over 14 metrics. The other update that we did is we adjusted one of our lagging performance indicators. It was calculating preventable accidents per revenue miles. We changed that to preventable accidents per total miles, since their accidents do occur in vehicles when they're not in service. Questions?
Questions for Brendan?
Just a small question. There's yellow through here, some here and there. Are those, does that yellow mark the changes?
Yes, sir.
And everything else is unchanged?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good practice.
This is slightly off the subject, but how is our performance this year compared to previous years with regard to accidents and so forth?
So in past years, when we were reduced in service, we did have lower accident rates. Our accident rates did climb a little bit just because we have more buses on the road. I think we also saw more vehicle traffic in general, greater congestion, but there isn't anything that is alarming with our accident rate. Our number of injuries has gone down, but as far as our number of reportable accidents, those have also been going down.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve the annual update to the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blile,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Aye.
Friedman,
Yes.
Nudo,
Yes?
Barnes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Our next action item is to consider the update to the safety-sensitive drug and alcohol policy.
Yeah, so the Federal Transit Administration requires grant sub-recipients to have a drug and alcohol policy to mitigate drug and alcohol misuse. Failure to have a compliant program could disrupt federal funding. This update is the first one that we've had in 3 years, and we have had and again, many of these changes are minor. Over the course of those 3 years, we've made some changes in our department, the Safety and Training Department. So some of the updates reflect some of those position changes. Probably the most significant update that we have so far is we've implemented a zero tolerance for alcohol while on duty. The important part of that is that the FTA requires no more than 0.04 blood alcohol content. Some of the concerns with that is depending on when that test may have been performed, they may fall at, it may read at 0.04, but this, that employee may have been on shift for 6 hours before, so it could have been above when they reported. So implementing the zero tolerance is going to help us ensure that folks are reporting to work unimpaired.
I guess my only concern with 0-0, you guys are doing breath tests. I mean, how accurate is the calibration of our equipment to get a 0? If somebody's at 0.01, they might have just eaten a fruit dish or something. I mean, that's a pretty low number to require, right?
Yes, so that we do have, there is a calibration test, and they do it, I believe, I don't have the number right off the top of my head, I think it's 10 minutes after to double check, and also during that time, they are not required, or they are not allowed to have anything consumed that could throw off the test.
Have you guys played with the machine and been able to blow a straight 0 just with a normal person who hasn't been drinking?
Phil, this is not our equipment. This is equipment at a certified lab.
And to add those techs that use that are trained for it, and they provide us with all of their certifications that show that they know how to properly use the equipment and perform the test.
Quick question on the last chance clause that you added 2 years instead of zero tolerance. So last chance is really not last chance, but that's the way I read it. Am I right?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase that?
The last chance agreement where a person can reapply after 2 years. The 2 years was added, it's in yellow.
It was reduced from 3 to 2.
Ah.
That was the change with that one.
Okay, I didn't know the past one. That's good.
Any other questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve the update to the safety-sensitive drug and alcohol policy?
So moved.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blile,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Yeah.
Friedman,
Yes.
Nudo,
Yes.
Barnes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Our final action item is to consider the approval of the Zero Emission Transition Plan 2025 update.
Brendan and Ashley are going to swap chairs, and we've mentioned this several times already today, but we generally have been bringing the transition plan to you annually for revisions, and so Ashley will walk you through that, and hopefully you've already had a chance to read it.
Thank you. I did not highlight the changes this year. I do apologize for that. I agree that is a good practice to implement that I will remember to do next year. So as a reminder, the Zero Emission Transition Plan is a requirement of our LONO and Bus Facilities grant applications to the federal government. Before funding a zero emission project, they want to ensure that each district has taken the time to understand the implications on the future financial and fleet health of the district. So as in summary, pages 1 through 3 talk about the fleet assessment, demonstrating a long-term fleet management plan with a strategy for how the applicant intends to use the current request for resources in future acquisitions. Page 4 talks about the availability of current and future resources to meet the costs for the transition and implementation. Pages 5 through 7 provide a facilities assessment to evaluate existing and future facilities and their relationship to the technology transition. Page 8 is a policy assessment that considers policy and legislation impacting relevant technologies. Page 9 is a partnership assessment to look at the partnerships of the applicant with the utility or alternative fuel providers. And then lastly, pages 9 through 11 provide a workforce analysis to examine the impact of the transition on the applicant's current workforce. These sections have stayed pretty consistent over time. The first zero emission transition plan was written for our district in 2022. And as we've mentioned, we have updated it slightly every year to reflect changes in our fleet replacement schedule or changes in policy, but they've all been relatively minor changes. So we make sure to update the graphs every year to provide an accurate picture of where our fleet composition is. And then we, of course, update the costs a bit every year in terms of assessing future costs for the district in implementing the transition plan. But with that, I'll take any questions you might have on any of the content in the plan.
We had a replacement page 131 at our table. I haven't read all this text. What's the difference?
Oh yeah, apologies, I should have mentioned that. I just noticed this week that in paragraph 3 of page 2, there were a couple dates were there were typos in the dates that were reflected that match figure 1 bus fleet composition.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions for Ashley? Okay, is there a motion to approve the Zero Emission Transition Plan 2025 update?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Will clerk please call the roll?
Blile,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Aye.
Friedman,
Yes.
Nudo,
Yes?
Barnes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. The next regular Board of Trustees meeting will be on Wednesday, August 27th, 2025 at 3 p.m. here at the Illinois Terminal, 45 East University in Champaign. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Seconded.
Before we adjourn, I just have a question about this other piece of paper. I just have a question about this other piece of paper we have that at our table that says C courts. What's the point of that?
That is the quarterly report on the CCARS, the rural county service that we are the operator for. The county contracts with us to provide that service, and then we do a quarterly report. That missed the binding of this, the board packet that you have in front of you. That's why it's a separate sheet. But you will normally see that every 3 months in the board packet.
Thank you. Move adjournment.
Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Do we have a motion? I'm sorry, do we have a motion? I got motion to adjourn?
I think George just gave it to you.
Okay.
I'll second it.
I was not
And
hearing
Phil
well.
seconded.
It's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.